Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today I have with me one of two founders of AAmp Studio. AAmp Studio is based both in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Portland, Maine. I'm going to tell you about some of our curated podcast partners. Two companies, starting with Kaplan's Appliances, a company that's an establishment in Toronto. Currently in their third generation as a family-owned and operated business. I was thinking about my own renovation, and when I was going through the planning phases of the reno, we were talking through what types of appliances we were going to want. So I brought my wife Wendy out with me, and we meet with our rep at the showroom. And the showroom is not like your traditional, just large scale industrial space. It's a curated special space. Why? Because they've got individual zones for different manufacturers, so you can walk in and understand the different products from the different suppliers. It's a space that really, it speaks to the industry. So before you even have a client, they work with you in understanding what you're looking for. What type of experience do you want your clientele to have? Because everyone's got their own individual requirements. So when you walk in, you feel that. You feel like this is a space curated for your clientele. And it's specific to you as a designer, an architect, even as a builder. So with that in mind, I bring my wife there, we walk through, we do this amazing walkthrough, and then we get this demo where they have two chefs in-house, and they prepare an amazing meal. And you get an understanding of what it's like, not only just to have a meal prepared on what you're eventually going to buy, but to really make you feel special. And then when you think about this, you get your appliances, they're installed and everything's great, and you finish your new build or you finish your renovation, and then a couple years later, let's say you need something. And it happens, right? Like sometimes there's an issue with an appliance. I don't go out there and call a 1-800 number. You call their service department and they work with you hand in hand at getting that resolved. And I've experienced this. We manage homes for some clients. We've got a client that's talking about an issue they have, and I go and I call their service department and it's looked after. I don't at this point have to look after anything else. And that's what you want from a partner. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out to me. It's Jonathan, Jonathan at waldenhomes.ca. And I will connect you with one of their specialists who will understand what you're looking for in the connectivity for your clientele and what you want them to experience from a rep. And they'll connect you with the right person. Kaplan's, they're special. And that's why we wanted them to be a partner on this podcast. Next, I want to tell you about The Doors. The Doors is our window and door supplier on a number of our projects. And when it came time to want to partner with someone for the podcast, I reached directly out to Martin and said, I'd like you to be a part of this. And the reason for that, again, in many ways similar to what I talk about with Kaplan's, is that there's a service and an ownership that they take on. When you're dealing with companies where the owners are focused on what that experience is like for the client, it matters. It makes our job as a builder for our clients a lot easier. We don't have to hold the hand quite as much because the service is so focused on that. Martin and Marta own the business. They're involved in everything from the quoting of the project initially through to installation and service. You're not being handed off at any point. And what's really amazing with them is that their product is available in multiple types, from PVC and fiberglass and vinyl to aluminum, to wood clad, to solid wood. They even do beautiful roof to wall or knee walls, and we've installed that. They do incredible curtain walls and really customized and specialized doors, exterior doors. If you're interested in learning more about this, I'm happy to introduce you to them. And also, if you're speccing for passive house, they have passive house windows and doors. Happy to connect you with Martin. My email address is Jonathan at waldenhomes.ca. That's Jonathan at waldenhomes.ca. Now, let's go back to the podcast. So today I have with me Marie Armstrong.
Hi, glad to be here.
Thanks for joining. I had actually come across Anne-Marie's sign in the area about just over a year ago. I think I reached out. It was probably in the fall. This beautiful renovation addition in Leaside that by the time this is released, you'll probably have seen, if you're listening to this in some publication, if not a couple publications. It is a beautiful project that hopefully will also be featuring throughout the course of the week on our Instagram account.
Amazing.
So a long-winded intro. Anne-Marie, thanks for coming over to my house. Thanks for having lunch.
Yeah, it was great. Really nice.
And thanks for doing this. So for those of you unfamiliar, you're about to become familiar with Anne-Marie. I should also mention Anne-Marie's partner is Andrew Ashey. He is currently running the practice out of Portland.
That's correct. Yeah.
So a nice division of labor, and she'll get into the practice, but we'll start it off with early life and inspirations in your life and what that looked like, if you can indulge.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to kind of revisit those moments before studying architecture and what brought me here.
Yeah.
I teach architecture at U of T, Daniel's School of Architecture, Landscape and Design. And I often ask my students, what if they can remember a time before they studied architecture and what they thought about architecture, which I think is sometimes hard to think about after you've been in the discipline for so long, and how you see buildings or how you thought about buildings before you started to learn about them and learn about the traditions of building and architecture and those sort of things. So it's always nice to have that opportunity to revisit it. Again, that's sort of a long-winded intro into speaking about myself, but I'm building up to it. So,
of course, it's also a weird thing to talk about yourself, right?
Yeah. It's so funny because architecture was not really something that I naturally gravitated to or really was aware of as a kid. I mean, beyond living in buildings and going to school in buildings and, enjoying the built environment as anybody would. I didn't really know of architects. I didn't know any architects. I was more interested in art. My grandmother was an artist.
What type of artist?
Mostly watercolors and pen and ink, or landscapes was something that she really focused on. And she was an artist and a lifelong artist. And also my aunt was an artist as well, but a more abstract oil painting. So growing up, I would paint and draw with them and learn how to do that through them. And it was very much a part of my own sort of interest and pastime. And I think for me, maybe when I was in high school, I started to get into photography and, would photograph the distillery district before it was reimagined as this sort of shopping district now.
Right.
That's when it was, abandoned buildings, in I guess it probably was the 90s or so. Or, I had a, family vacation to Cuba and we stayed in Havana and was so fascinated with the kind of beautiful architecture, but also deteriorating and sort of abandoned space of the distillery, or even this sort of deteriorating sort of grandeur. And so my interest was more in those effects on buildings rather than necessarily designing them. I think it's like there's always that classic story of I really liked art and I really liked math, and so I became an architect. But in my case, my father was a hobby astronomer and mathematician. And so the other side of me, that beyond art, I was really interested in, we would do like little math puzzles together when I was a kid, and problem solving riddles and logic puzzles and those sort of things. Yeah, which is like almost just for fun, like we'd always have some sort of interesting book with sort of like problem solving games and things. So beside art, I was really interested in kind of like puzzles. And I think that is certainly something that I can see now as my own kind of interest and affinity in architecture, is sort of solving little puzzles, through like planning spaces or coming up with responses to a client's needs or a brief or a site, So I think those interests sort of were there as a foundation for me. And then at a certain point in high school, you're asked to kind of pick what you want to study. And so
it's hard, right?
Yeah.
How to distill down all these interests that I have into something that I may or may not want to pursue professionally.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah. And architecture, I'm not sure who recommended it to me or how I think it might have been like a family friend who had a daughter who went to Waterloo or something. And so I heard about her experiences and thought, oh, that could be kind of interesting. But at the same time, I applied to, Waterloo University as a kind of Toronto-based student, thinking just very specifically, mostly about Ontario universities, because I wasn't, my horizons had not expanded at that point.
Yeah,
yet.
The concept of moving away was not something you wanted to necessarily look at pursuing.
Yeah, so I'm looking at architecture. I applied to business school at Western. I applied to what at the time I think was a fledgling program at U of T for computer science and artificial intelligence.
They had an artificial intelligence program?
They had it was artificial intelligence. It was computer science blended with the philosophy department, which was sounded really fascinating at the time, just as a high school student thinking, oh, this could be really neat to think about both, computer science and programming, but also the ethics or philosophy and the idea of artificial intelligence. So at that time, it wasn't, at least to my understanding, as a high school student in like the late 90s, not something that I would, I thought, oh, this is going to be the emerging field, I just sort of thought, this sounds really great, know, and exciting and sort of interesting, and marrying again my kind of interests in, let's say, more sensory art, creative thinking mixed. Of course, math is creative thinking as well, but mixed with the kind of core logical thinking of math. So in a way, like an interest in artificial intelligence could have been and a philosophy, computer science thing kind of felt similar in a vein to architecture, like the technical and the art practice or that sort of thing. So,
I mean, I kind of feel like it was like the live way of fulfilling those little math equations that you were doing with your father.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it sort of, I thought, well, my brain is engaged in different ways of thinking. And I think in the end, I'm not sure why I selected architecture. I just think I liked Waterloo's program because it had, a focus on drawing and history and design. And it kind of covered multiple bases of different ways of thinking rather than a kind of single track thinking. So you could really maybe find your way in different ways in a program like that. So then I embarked on it. I sort of took a leap of faith.
and if you were not entirely certain that this was the field you wanted to go into, how did you develop your portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a lot of art. I had the photography, which I think the photography, was where, when I presented my portfolio at Waterloo, I think that's where the affinity of talking about architecture as something that has a lifespan beyond, completing the work. It lives with people and it reacts to environments and it becomes in some way organic over time. And I think that there were some nice conversations that came. So I had no architecture design, no kind of building technology drafting courses in high school. It was all kind of art based.
And was the art that you were like, so when you say that you had a portfolio of photography, had you been taking photography courses, or was this was a passion that you fulfilled outside of school?
Well, when I was in high school, I joined this program that again was sort of new at the time for TDSB called Cyber Arts.
Oh, which I know this.
Yeah.
Don Mills.
Yeah, Don Mills. So I went to Don Mills.
I applied to the Cyber Arts program.
Yeah. So great. There's an amazing teacher there who is very much, I consider, a really foundational mentor for me, who was the director and I think helped to found that program called Tito Faria. I'm not sure if he still works in TDSB. He became a principal of another school and moved on, but like an amazing teacher who was just starting that program at the time.
I remember.
Yeah.
On the topic of this, like, I remember when that program started and I had multiple teachers saying, like, you should apply for this, you should apply for this. I applied and I got in, and then I turned it down because I was afraid of what it would be like in something brand new and what was going to happen.
Yes.
You said yes to it.
Yes, I said yes.
So because there were they were forecasting that students that were going to go through that would be able to find jobs at like incredible animation studios.
Yes.
And do a ton with their skill sets.
Yeah, and many of them have. I have one friend who I haven't been in touch with for a while, but good friend when we were in high school that we sort of kept in touch with, and she's, you know, one of the like leading CGI kind of developers. I'm not sure where she's based now, but Fiona Wong, I mean, she's super talented, and there were just it was like an interesting kind of group of students that had different, you know, cyber arts was wonderful because you could come at it from different angles.
Yeah.
You know, there was graphic design, filmmaking, traditional, like, let's say fine art, photography, and then everything else in between. And it became actually, in some way, it reminds me a little bit of architecture school, because half the day you're there and you're in this kind of tight-knit group together, but you form really close bonds. And sometimes these students aren't necessarily like the most popular students. They all have really kind of specific interests. But it was a really supportive and exciting space to be in, because all the kids were just, we were all really interested in art, you know, and creating things. And, you know, we were using like Adobe before I think it became a thing. And they had the or Quark Express or whatever it was.
They had Quark Express, but they also had Adobe.
They
had Adobe Photoshop, but they didn't have Adobe Premiere at the time. They were using Quark Express.
Yes.
And I remember because all the Apple computers that they had they had the color backing, right? The teal or the orange or the clear.
Totally,
Sorry. This is like I haven't spoken of cyber arts.
Yeah. It's
got to be 25 years, I think, probably 20 years since I've ever mentioned it.
Yeah, no, I think one of the highlights for me of that program was they invited, I can't remember his name now, but the creator of Wallace and Gromit.
Okay.
And we spent a week just doing stop action claymation film. Like, that's the kind of, somehow they were able to, like Tito, Freya, and whoever, and the others that were involved with cyber arts were able to carve out half the day for students to pursue this sort of work, you know, inside of a curriculum where we're still going to English class and math class, but we're getting really focused opportunities to express ourselves in different ways. And strangely enough, that program, I'm still relatively, let's say, introverted as a person, but I remember that program actually being, because it was so tight knit and you got to know the teachers really well. Like I was saying, Tito Freya was very much a mentor. I had a lot of fear of public speaking, and for some reason, Tito Freya saw some potential for me in a way. I'd presented a piece of art or something in class and invited me to MC for open houses and, you know, put me in the spotlight as a student that I think shied away from the spotlight.
Right.
And that really opened up a whole other world of like public speaking and gaining confidence.
I was going to say that, but the confidence factor.
Yeah. It was really transformational for me as a student. And that's why I think, you know, both the program itself, but the support and encouragement and believing in students that program fostered and the teachers were very much a part of was just, a really important foundational experience. I'm sorry that you didn't join.
It's okay. I mean, now I completely understand what your portfolio looked like when you applied to Waterloo.
Yes.
You probably had one of the best portfolios of people that applied.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. There's a range of things. Yeah.
What a small world.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that have participated in this, if you haven't, but if you've ever done this in person, I generally always try to invite people over when we have lunch. We talk about things, and there's a lot about people that I try not to engage in over the course of that lunch because I want it to be net new information during the conversation. And this right now
Yes.
is like, so it's such a rewarding experience for me.
Yeah.
Selfishly, I'm like loving this. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Don Mills too.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if that's what brought you over there, but
I grew up in York Mills.
oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was
yeah.
like literally, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay. So you apply to Waterloo. You're a part of a group that is, I think I've probably interviewed a whole bunch of them now.
Yeah.
And there's probably more upcoming.
Yeah.
So the experience of Waterloo, I'm going to have to, was it not so similar to what you experienced in cyber arts program?
That's a great question.
Because the group of students that would have gotten into cyber arts is a small group. It's like, I think it's like what? It's like 30 or 40 kids a year, maybe.
Yeah. It was very focused. And I think partway through my time at cyber arts, there was a building addition built onto, I think it was a TEPL project, but it was built onto the existing kind of like 50s, 60s style Don Mills High School.
Yeah.
And that's where we would go half the day. So it felt very, it was the start of a kind of, being used to a tight knit group that would sort of, do everything together, and having a studio space, a dedicated studio space that came kind of naturally to me when I transitioned into Waterloo. I was used to that sort of investment, like kind of spending more time than you normally would on something, because especially in art, I guess having always, drawn, and I was always so used to just spending every time, the free time that I had would be spent drawing, or spent working on a painting or something. So it wasn't foreign for me to go into a studio environment like architecture school and say, okay, now you're going to be here 24 hours a day. Like that, if somebody were to have said that to me, I don't think it really bothered me too much, because I was invested in pursuing kind of creative ideas,
right? Which
I knew took time, a time investment in a way, even at a young age. It didn't really bother me because it was sort of fun,
Yeah.
Or rewarding in some way. Yeah, like Waterloo, when I went to Waterloo, it was still at the Waterloo campus, and now it's in Cambridge.
Yes.
And so there, I think we were still, it felt maybe more like cyber arts in the sense that you had your group, but you also were connected to the wider school. And then when we all moved, I think it was my third year or so, second or third year, we moved to Cambridge, then you were kind of on your own as a group, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
We are starting a newsletter. It's called Inside the Challenge. We want you to be a part of it, either as a consumer of the information or to record the information. The concept is simple. We're going to book a 10 to 20 minute time on Zoom, and you're going to record with me and share your challenge. If you don't want to record, well, how about you consume it? You can email me to either record with me or email me to register and sign up to receive the newsletter. People are going to be talking about the challenges of operations, of sales, of constructability, how personal elements are affecting their professional life. I've already recorded a whole bunch of them from people in the industry, the owners of architecture practices and design practices and consulting practices. We really look forward to getting this out to you. Feel free to connect Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca. We look forward to getting this to you.
And so you go to that program, you have the opportunity to do, I know, the term abroad, and you have the opportunity for co-op.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did it look like when you were looking for co-op? Were there certain places that you wanted to try to find, that you wanted to go work, or did you just kind of cast a wide net? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I think about it, I didn't really have, I guess I was really curious about, first off, I think my first co-op term was working for Diamond Schmitt in Toronto. And that was the only time that I ended up staying in Toronto. And then I started traveling. But I think being quite young at the time, let's say 19 or 20, and then also just never having really worked with architects or in an architecture office, it was a good way to sort of stay in a familiar environment, but then enter into an unfamiliar environment, which would be the practical or practice side of things. So it was a great experience. There are a couple architects there, John Sewells and Dan Klink, who I worked on a project with, and they were wonderful, kind of very experienced architects that had patience and time to encourage me and give me some work, and expose me to practice, which is awesome. And
what did you get to work on while you were there?
I worked on a Hebrew University engineering school with Dan Klink, and John Sewells, I think, was I'm not sure if he was a principal yet, but he was sort of a principal in charge, and so I worked on that exclusively, and actually did a lot of drawings to figure out how to get stone kind of cladding to work on a curved surface, and it was all done in like AutoCAD at the time, like no 3D modeling, just like optimizing what the radii of this really loop-de-loop kind of outcropping of a building that was part of the proposal, so it was really wonderful to be just at my desk kind of working through, almost like a problem solving puzzle.
Yeah.
Looking at geometry and those sort of things.
Is this an opportunity where you were able to call your dad and be like, Dad, this is what I'm working on right now?
Actually, you know what? My dad and I had some great conversations while I was at school, because I did always have puzzles. So he would, in his own way, try to think about, he was always interested in, like as a mathematician, in the elegant, most direct way to solve something.
Right.
But he always had this sort of interest in thinking about mathematical equations as beautiful in their own way, or elegant, so we'd always talk about, okay, is this strategy kind of logical enough or straightforward? And we would have conversations a lot about my work in architecture school. That was really nice. And then I ended up traveling after that.
Okay.
I spent a term in New York, and then the third co-op term I went to London, England. And I sort of fell in love with that city, and then went back again for a longer extended co-op term before we studied in Rome. So
okay.
So London, England, was really wonderful.
What was it about London that just won you over?
Yeah. I loved that you could get lost in that city really easily, that there were just we like at the time, we didn't have smartphones, and so
I do know.
Yeah. You must know.
Again, if you're listening to this,
yes.
I've said this on other episodes. You have to appreciate that. Like, if you wanted directions to go somewhere, you're printing it off. You're printing it off of MapQuest. Okay.
Yes.
Like Google Maps didn't exist. Okay, or you were lucky enough to have like maybe the last 5-year version of Burley's map.
Yes.
Or what's the book?
The A to Z in London was the one.
The A to Z. Okay.
So it was an amazing kind of pocket, maybe 4x5. It was a small book that you could carry in a bag, maybe not a pocket, maybe you had a big pocket, and I just carry that around, and you could look up where you are, and that was the way to get around. Or
Lonely Planet.
Oh, yes. Lonely Planet would be a good one. Yeah.
Sorry.
I remember, this is like the time where you would make plans with people and say, I will meet you here. And then you print out your MapQuest map, and
there was no calling that person to say, like, are you close?
Yeah.
There is literally just the waiting game if you're there.
Exactly. Yeah. There's maybe if you're running late, you'd stop at the subway and, use a phone.
Yeah. Yeah. Do I have to change?
Yeah. So
sorry, go ahead. So, we digress.
But it sounds so wonderful to think of now. So I'd have my A to Z, and then I think the streets of London, I lived on the East End in Brick Lane.
Yeah.
And you just walk, I worked in Angel, which is another area of London, and, walk along the Regent's Canal to work. It'd take me an hour, but it was sort of this wonderful experience of being at the water lower in the canal and seeing houseboats and the buildings above, and how the city would change as you walk north, to work for that hour. And I don't know, there was something just really, I loved that there were so many different types of neighborhoods in London, that there was always like a really great market somewhere, or it just had so much history. I mean, the history thing, it was more that it was just, there were lots of nooks and crannies and ways to discover things that were hidden behind doors, that I think really intrigued me.
Mm-hmm.
I was also growing up a bit of an Anglophile with like reading Jane Austen and that sort of thing. So I had a kind of another type of interest in British culture in that way.
Fair.
So,
Fair.
So it all kind of came together as a wonderful package.
And when you were there, what types of, and whether or not you don't have to disclose, but the practice you were working on at in London, what types of projects were you working on there?
Yeah. So I worked for a practice. A lot of what happened at Waterloo was that a number of students you'd either identify practices you wanted to work at, or you might identify a city you want to work in. And for me, I was interested in London as the city versus targeting a particular practice.
Got it.
And so I reached out to a number of different practices. It wasn't like I said, oh, I want to work for David Chipperfield, even though I did. And I tried to apply, but I didn't get it. And he's like a wonderful, like, minimalist, modernist, I mean, just incredible architect. So I applied to an office where another Waterloo student, an upper level student, had already had a position there. So as he was leaving, a lot of Waterloo students will try to like piggyback on and kind of continue to kind of fill that role that's been emptied by the student that's going back to school. So in a way, I worked for a company called Aedas, I guess, which is like a larger conglomerate kind of mega practice, multiple locations. But there were at the time like 3 people from Norman Foster's office that had been brought into that London studio to run competitions. So I actually ended up working with them for the most part. And that was great. So it was almost like Foster Light in another environment, and so there was some rigor to the designing and thinking about design. And there was a lot of speed in the way we were applying for competitions, mostly school projects, like elementary school projects, but it was great. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so what led you from I guess you finished your co-op term, you come back, and did you do a master's right away?
Yeah, I took a year off.
Okay.
And I went out to LA.
Okay.
So at that point, when I graduated from Waterloo has a master's program.
Yeah.
So I did the undergraduate and completed it, and then wanted to take a little break. And I wasn't sure yet if I was going to go back to Waterloo, which would have been the most straightforward way probably to complete my, let's say, education, or to try another school. So I took a year off, and I thought to myself, again, it was more city specific, where I said, I'd like to live for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Again, I'm in my 20s. So
yeah.
I'd like to live in LA or Berlin, like who knows why. So,
I mean, because at the time, this is early 2000s.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They're just cool places
to
go.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, come on. What more do you need?
Right. And, at the end, it's so funny because you knew that if you could get work somewhere, you could find roommates, and you just live in the city. And in my 20s, I had no expectations about like quality of life or anything. Yeah. I'm just going to show up, have a job.
I can eat rice or craft dinner, hopefully, if it's available in Berlin.
Yeah, I'll live in somebody's living room. I don't know. It's easy. So I applied there, and I was hired by a company in Berlin. I'm blanking on their name, but really great work. And then for some reason I cold called emailed just Frank Gehry's office in LA. And at the time, it was like mid 2000s, so the economy was booming at that time, and they were looking for people. And so I ended up being hired at Frank Gehry's office. And I thought, not being necessarily a big fan of Gehry's at the time, and again, early 20s, I didn't understand his work prior to Disney. Like, I didn't understand his early work, which I really love too now. But, I just thought this could be kind of interesting, and LA sounds great. So let's go. And so I worked at Frank's office.
Before you go into that, was this a difficult conversation with your parents?
No, I think that they were used to me traveling at this point, in a way. I think that they thought I had made I had sort of also been interested in finding a way to be able to go back to London and work again. So I think they were happy that maybe I stayed in North America.
Yeah. You don't have to cross the ocean to see you.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then also my mom had a distant kind of like second cousin in LA that from Barbados that was able, that at least she knew that somebody was going to be there, that another adult.
Fair.
that she could rely on to help me if needed or something. So yes, I went out to Frank's office and worked in his model shop for the most part in that year. And at the same time, I was applying to graduate schools as well, both in Waterloo, which I applying for different scholarships, and I applied for a few architecture schools in the U.S. and ended up getting into Yale and accepting it there. And that's what kind of brought me to New Haven. So yeah, I guess I was traveling for a long time, in a way, sort of being away from Toronto for quite a while.
Right. Yeah. And so is it there where you had met Andrew?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Andrew and I were in the same class and it was a 3-year program. So there were opportunities within that kind of teaching the curriculum to have group work, and sometimes you work individually, but Andrew and I partnered a couple times, and both, I think, kind of immediately saw that we worked really well together, that we had a similar kind of love for design. And then also I think that we were both like really hard workers as well, in some way, that those different aspects of our own personalities worked well together.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew and I often talk about why, even though we're, let's say I'm in Toronto and he's in Portland, Maine, like how are we able to make this work? I think we both appreciate a certain way of design thinking that often is tied to like logical thinking, or somehow puzzling through something, And so we both might come at a kind of question from different angles, but we will always sort of acknowledge which one's more, let's say, which one's like strategically more strong or logical, or we think in a similar way in that way in terms of design. And I think there's really no ego as a result, which is kind of nice.
I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If there's not a power struggle when you're looking at the concepts of ideas.
Yes. Yeah.
How to resolve something, because that ultimately can be either the best component of the practice or the most detrimental.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we both have a strong sense of design, but I think at the end of the day, we align on really like core values like that are really rooted in what's the best solution. And we can acknowledge when either one of us might come up with something like, so far it's been really great. And it's been a few years now that we've been together. And
so I want to ask you, what did it look like when you were coming up with the concept of starting a practice together? Like, did you sit down at a table, you're having coffee, or after a class or something? And if you did, what did that look like? Did you describe to each other, you said before that there's no real full mandate for the practice, but some of those core values, what did that look like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think when we started thinking about working together, it was sort of, again, a kind of organic thing, in the sense that we both like working together at school. And I think we both recognized a kind of mutual admiration for each other's, let's say, design strengths or approaches. And so I was in LA at the time, and Andrew had been thinking, he went to New York after grad school and then moved out to LA a few years later. And at that time, we'd been in touch, and, we should do a competition together, or is there, something that we could, continue to do some writing or research or publish something together, but we wanted to collaborate in some form. And I think, maybe it was that we kind of fell back on a more traditional model where we thought, well, we could have a business together and that would be our way to collaborate in a way. So that's one thing. But I think at the core of it, Andrew and I there were a couple things that I think brought us together. Both our shared kind of like that we had a kind of an approach to design that worked for us together, that we both admired in each other. But there was also another aspect to being a young architect in other practices where we found that we had concerns about like quality of life, if that makes sense. So we were concerned about like long hours, I don't know the term, like FaceTime, like having to be there all the time. We were both hardworking people, so we would do those long hours. But I think at the end of it, I think we saw opportunities to be more streamlined and more efficient, and thought that if we could start our own practice, we could base that practice on kind of mutual respect for people and their time outside of the profession, outside of working.
Interesting.
That we could still do quality work without asking people to work on weekends or ourselves. I mean, at the time we were just the two of us for many years working together, but we made it a point not to do that, and that was at the time for us, it felt revolutionary because we'd been working in offices where that was a given. And so we were excited about that opportunity in addition to collaborating together, that we were aligned on those values.
Right.
And I think that that's extended into the way we like work with people and our clients. Like we want it to be collaborative and open. And I think, those things all come hand in hand, I guess.
Yeah.
But
so when you're starting, do you have any projects to start with, or do you have this idea we'll just start it and then we'll go look for something?
Yeah. So we met a few times in LA at the beginning and tried like a competition, which was, I can't recall. I think there was a competition in New York at the time. I want to say now that I can't really remember, but it was sort of like installation work, public installation. So a way to maybe get our name out there, to design something together that had a program and that might eventually be built. So we started there and we just meet for coffee, have a brunch and sort of speak about what our ideas were and then sort of develop them on the side after work and that sort of thing. But then there was an opportunity through Andrew, a friend of Andrew's who owned a company called Comparties Chocolates. He was a chocolatier in LA, and he was looking to build a small chocolate shop in Melrose in kind of, a secondary room off of a coffee shop.
Okay.
So it's a small space, and that was our first project. And we were Comparties is well known in LA for their chocolate wrapper design. It's very graphic. There's like beautiful colors, like all kind of wonderful patterns. And so if you put all their packaging together, it's like this amazing rainbow of just like incredible color and pattern. And so it became a kind of natural influence for the design of using pattern, tile pattern, just sort of capitalizing on a small space and laying it out and making sure that the packaging is the thing that kind of shines through. So our patterns were black and white, for example, on floors and that sort of thing. But the display of the chocolate and the patterns and colors were what came through. So it was a great project that then got some, coverage online and sort of loosely launched our practice.
Right. And had you registered the practice at this point in both Portland, Maine and Toronto?
No. So at the time, this was very much a fledgling moonlighting kind of ordeal.
Heard a few of these.
Pre-licensure, by the way, on both our sides. Then I became licensed in California, and we really put the brakes on things because once you're licensed, there's a lot of requirements.
Yes.
And it wasn't really until I moved back to Toronto and became licensed here as well in Ontario in around 2018 that we kind of put up our sign and said, let's do this. So, I lived at my mom's place for a while and, kind of started the practice that way. And then we got a project in Toronto and we worked on a hotel interior lobby space in Denver. These are some of our very early projects.
How did you come across a hotel lobby in Denver?
So this is through Andrew, whose husband, at the time they were partners, but his husband is a co-owner of like a cocktail group originally called Death and Company, which is a like really great, like when you might have heard, again, this is going to date me, but the first day, early aughts of artisanal cocktail, like thinking and making, he was very much like part of that world.
Okay.
And Death and Company built this really great reputation for making amazing cocktails. So they're in Manhattan. That was their first outpost. And then they, through that reputation, started to expand.
Got it.
And they gave us, Death and Company had another consultancy group where they would, people would approach them and say, hey, I have this idea for a bar. Can you consult and help us with like the cocktail development, menu development, or equipment layouts and this sort of thing. So Death and Company kind of gave, approached us and said, you guys want to take on a little job here or there? And it was nice. But we still had to prove ourselves, very much. And through that sort of built trust and relationship that has sort of blossomed into, as they've grown as a company, we've sort of also been brought along, which is really great.
I would say. And this is a company you're still doing work with now?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So actually our longest standing client.
And how many projects have you done with them at this point?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say at least 8.
Wow.
Probably.
That's a good client.
Yeah. Very good client. Wonderful people. I mean, of course, Andrew's partner and husband, rather, but wonderful people to work with. And we just have such a good working relationship now.
I was going to say, like, just because they're a partner doesn't mean that it's going to work.
Yes.
It could be the exact opposite.
Yeah. It's true. So yeah, we've been really lucky to work with them. And like, as we've grown as a practice, they've also grown as well. And it's been good.
So what led you to having to hire your first employee? If there were 2 of you and you kind of felt like, at the time the workload was manageable.
Yeah. Actually, our first employee, we hired when I had to go on mat leave.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was our first, because I think before that, Andrew and I would work so kind of we were very much, we had a sort of really great working style where it seemed to work as 2. But when I had to take some time off when my daughter was born, it wasn't possible with our workload to have one person. So we hired our first team member then. And then strangely enough, it's been growing very quickly from there on. So it's almost like that moment where we realized we needed support was that moment where I had a child.
Change. Yeah. So sorry, I guess we didn't get to it, but just the in between. So you first registered. I wanted to go back to that. So you first registered the practice where? Was it in Toronto or was it
in Toronto?
Maine. Okay.
Yeah. And in Maine, so when I moved back to Toronto, Andrew was still in LA.
Okay.
And in our minds, we were a Toronto LA practice. And I had a license in both California and now in Ontario.
Got it.
And we had projects in California as well as in Toronto. And that worked out really well. But the practice was based in Toronto in terms of like, let's say, liability insurance and sort of thing.
And was Andrew here?
Andrew was in LA.
Okay.
And I would go back and forth. This is like pre-children and
yeah, of course.
Still having like a lot of connections and things in LA. So, and then when there was the shutdown, and Andrew, who's originally from New Hampshire, moved from LA to Portland, Maine, and to be closer to family. And so it ended up that our presence in LA wasn't, let's say, we weren't like as present in LA anymore. Physically, we were based now in Toronto and Portland, Maine. So that's where Andrew then got his license during the pandemic. And we sort of officially opened shop, let's say, in Toronto and Portland at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of the business development nowadays, what does that look like when you're trying to win projects? I know that I had also asked you a question about employees, but initially, are you then trying to win projects in both places and then kind of figure that out? Or is this just, let's focus on the Portland, Maine first, then Toronto, or Toronto first, then Portland?
Yeah, I think that we had always thought that we could try to work on both fronts.
Okay.
So as I was trying to build, let's say, more of a portfolio, or let's say we were trying to build more of a portfolio in Toronto, and just sort of meeting more people and getting, just getting reconnected with the city. I think, having been away from Toronto for so long, when I came back as an adult, let's say, it took some time to like reconnect and say, I'm experiencing the city more as an adult now than as a teenager. So this is a very different city. So there was that of just, and we completed a project in Roncesvalles, and that sort of helped us to like, get into design lines and sort of maybe reconnect with an architectural community here. And then that was also occurring for Andrew in Portland, although it happened a bit more slowly because the pandemic wasn't really, there weren't events happening. So we were able to do some of this work in Toronto before the pandemic.
Right.
When he moved to Portland, Maine, the pandemic kind of, there wasn't the opportunity for that. But now Andrew is so involved in the Portland architecture community. I mean, he's an AIA board member there for Maine chapter, which is like the equivalent of like the RAIC in America. He's a president of the Architects organization that does these like great architecture lectures in Maine. So he's very much embedded in that scene and made a concerted effort, both because he's like super social, but also because it's great to just connect with all those people. And so we've made a lot of connections and inroads into both cities, which has been great. But in terms of the way we approach work, the interesting thing with our practice is that our work is not, let's say, focused or siloed to either Portland, Maine or Toronto. I mean, we're working all over the US particularly. Like I say that our Canadian projects are centered in Ontario, but our US practice, like we have a hotel in construction in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
We have a bar about to go to construction in Atlanta. We've completed a bar in Washington, D.C. We've worked all over Seattle.
No one's seeing that as Emery's naming these locations. She's got a big smile across her face because it's validating, right? You spend a portion of your life traveling and trying to lay down roots and try to figure this whole thing out, and now to have your portfolio extending past different states and different cities and province, it's pretty special.
No, I think it's a unique position to be in.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to have that, be a bit nimble. I think as we were talking before over lunch, as a practice where we can be nimble and we can work, we don't necessarily have to stay in the region that we're in to be able to make an impact, in some way, or, so we feel a bit untethered from those locations to the point where I think our practice could probably shift to another city, if one of us were to move, and it wouldn't necessarily impact the practice, which is sort of an interesting business model in a way. Because for the most part, I think traditionally architects are like, unless you're a really big firm, you're 100%. Rooted in your location.
Yeah. To be able to kind of pick up and work anywhere and not be confined. To have the freedom is a big thing. I actually find, having spoken to quite a number of practices at this point, that those that have a more diversified portfolio on location of projects can weather the storms better as recessions come or as clientele can change.
Yeah. And it is nice. It is nice to be able to practice as a small practice in both residential and hospitality, bars, restaurants, hotels, because we find that, like, so for example, the Death & Co. group that we were just talking about, their work is in bars and restaurants. And they say, well, actually, when a recession happens, we're kind of the people that still are in business, because everyone still wants to go to the bar, so it's nice to know that and that was completely opposite during the pandemic, where all hospitality spaces for the most part were closed.
Totally.
And we had to, but we had some residential work. And so we were able to start promoting our work in residential.
Right.
So as long as we can ideally stay nimble as best as possible, I think as a small practice, that's something that we appreciate. I think where we'd love to go as a practice is also kind of being able to contribute to like institutional public work, which is so hard to crack into.
We touched on that a little bit at lunch.
Yeah. So I think, that would be more better diversification, let's say, to be able to approach public work, because then, between the three of those, you're in a good position. So we're working away on that in our office right now as our next sort of goals to sort of pursue. But it's a tricky one to get into.
I feel like the hardest part of a lot of that is just, where do you set yourself up fees wise?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's
a hard thing to figure out.
Exactly. Especially when you're a smaller practice too. You can't really take too many risks with your fees.
Well, hopefully I'm saying this now that given when we're recording versus when it airs, I'm hoping that in some way the initiatives that we wanted to implement have now been well established. Because a part of that is the idea of retaining and also sharing information from partners to be able to help position everybody better for their practice.
Yeah.
So the practice now, 2 offices and a wide variety of projects between residential and hospitality across many regions throughout North America. What does it look like from the employee standpoint? Because you had mentioned that before briefly, and I haven't gone back to it yet.
Yeah.
So you had to hire your first employee. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the evolution of the employees.
Yeah.
And what roles they fulfill.
Yeah. So our team, we have 9 now. Yeah. So 5 in Toronto and 4 in Portland, Maine.
Okay. Inclusive of yourselves?
Inclusive of ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah. And the employees, for the most part, are trained architects. We have 2 employees that are licensed architects, and then a few that are on their way to licensure.
Okay.
So our office, even though our practice offers a few different services, so we will, especially from a hospitality perspective, we'll offer like branding, interior design, so all the way down to like furniture selection, accessory selection, and then architecture, which is the core base. We tend to still lean and rely on architects for a lot of our work, but we recently hired a very talented interior designer, which is the first kind of foray outside of our comfort zone, but like very much required for this sort of work and scale of work, especially as now we're moving into a hotel kind of scale. Mm-hmm. Interior designer, and we've looked at the possibility of hiring a graphic designer too, but haven't
to help with the branding elements.
Yeah. So I think as an office, I think we're able to bring on not just architects, but other creative practitioners to contribute. And I think that'll make our office a lot stronger.
Oh, yeah. It's a differentiator. For sure.
Yeah. So that's been exciting. I would say that, what's interesting about our practice is that you may be an architect working with us in Toronto or a designer working with us in Toronto, and you may be working on a project in the US and vice versa. So our US team and our Toronto team really work actively as team members. They're not siloed to US-based projects or Toronto-based projects. So you'll have a team, right now that may be comprised of someone in the US and someone in Canada. And then either Andrew or myself is maybe like the principal in charge. Mm-hmm. And so we collaborate for the most part over Slack and Zoom, even though we have like dedicated offices in both locations, because our team is across borders.
Yeah, and I think that there's also the massive shift that happened after COVID.
Yes.
And people's ability to want to be able to connect.
Definitely. And it's
in the right ways.
Yeah. And I would say that it's been really interesting to hear feedback from our team, because Andrew and I have always, in some sense, since I moved back from LA, to Toronto, we'd always been in Slack before it became popular, during the pandemic. So when everyone went online, we were sort of like, well, this is what we do every day. And so we were concerned that might be a lot to sustain for a team post the pandemic where everyone may want to go back. But for the most part, our team is really happy not to have to commute. They feel like they're in an office space, even though it's virtual. Like there's a lot of activity happening all the time.
So is your team they're in office 5 days a week?
So our team in Toronto is in and out of the office, sort of hybrid. We have a more dedicated in-person team in Portland, Maine.
Yep.
And this is, again, kind of being a nimble practice where the rents to rent a larger office in Toronto are pretty exorbitant, whereas in Portland, Maine, they're much more affordable. So we have to sort of dial up and down our remoteness. Our remote working or collaboration in Toronto is a bit more remote than in Portland, Maine, if that makes sense. But we all, as a team, actually, for example, in October, the whole team, Portland and Toronto, got together in Toronto, which was really nice. And then individually within those cities, we'll have, in-person events and different things and site visits and things to like make us still connect in person in a way.
And so how often do you have the in-person meeting as offices?
Yeah. So right now we've been doing it almost like annually, whereas Andrew and I we have quarterly meetings, which help us to connect and talk about the business and the health of the business and where we aim for it to go, and setting goals. And those happen on a quarterly basis.
Okay.
And those would be in person between Andrew and I. And then we have projects where we're traveling. We have our largest project right now is a 100-room hotel in Portland, Maine. So I have been to Portland every few months for that project. And so I get to see the team there, but the rest of our team in Toronto doesn't, so that's why we wanted everyone to get together,
And do you envision that at the end of a project like that, you have all the teams come together and go do like a celebratory?
Yes. Walkthrough? Yeah, that would be, that is the goal, to have those moments. Yeah. Yeah. So, as much as we can, we try to make that happen. And that's where I think we're trying to make sure that, as a busy practice, that we still make time for events, like things like that, are in person, because it is useful. It's very valuable for
useful.
Everyone.
Yeah. Useful. Also somewhat of it can be a logistical thing where, you want to get everyone together, but at the same time, you've got all these clients that are looking for deliverables.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, what do we do here?
Yeah. It's always a challenge, I think, because there's never a dull moment. So you have to try to find that time to carve it out and hold on to it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's been a lot. That's been to kind of create those boundaries is something that we're still working on, where we can say, no, this is actually time for our team. And so we're just going to have to put up our away messages, and that's okay. We're still kind of working through that.
What have been some of the tougher challenges that you've experienced over the tenure of the practice?
Yeah. I think one thing that for me, I think it aligns with both a challenge. Well, I'll start with maybe the personal one, personal / professional, where, I had a child, and that was a challenge, being not a sole practitioner, but a small office rather, where you very much are dedicated to the growth of the business, and you invest a lot of time and you keep working at it. When you have a child, that sort of has to get put to the side.
Oh, totally.
So I think for me, the biggest challenge has been prioritizing, which is something that I think is at the core, again, like I was mentioning before, about why Andrew and I started this practice, is actually to be very focused on creating those boundaries between practice and life and family. So that has been a big challenge, because now I end the day at 5 and I end the day at 5, and I might still be thinking about the practice, but I really am focusing my energy on my daughter.
Right. That's hard. I feel like that is very hard to do as a business owner.
Yes.
To be able to actually physically shut down.
Yes. Yeah. So that has been a big challenge. That, and I would say to the challenge of growing as a practice, where neither Andrew and I are by any means, business experts or HR professionals. That has been a big learning curve, to be able to be available to our team, to know that they're supported, that they're being listened to, that we're addressing their questions, or, that we're there for mentorship. And, and I think we work really hard at that, but it's a new horizon where we've always been very project and client focused.
Right.
And now we have to sort of treat our practice as if it is its own project that needs attention. And in addition to that our team is equally as important to the success. And so that's a completely different mindset that we've had to shift into.
Yeah, they feel like they're being respected.
Yes.
And their professional, well, also their personal intents are at the forefront of where the business is going to go and how it's going to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Them evolve.
Yeah. And us also letting go a bit. Whereas where we started, Andrew and I would be in the weeds, because it was just the two of us. There was no choice. And now we still, I think, grapple with that, because we're not a big practice, but we're in the middle, where you have to give people autonomy, obviously.
Well, but two offices and nine total people, it's that's a business.
Yes.
That is.
Has somehow.
That's a challenge. It's not like you have one small little office with 3 people or something like that. But when you're managing and I would imagine that the whole element of both Canada and the US, there's a lot you got to deal with on the accounting side of things.
Yep.
A lot of small practices don't have to deal with.
Yes. So we're hoping that NAFTA or the agreement sustains itself. For example, we have been keeping our eyes on this.
I'm sure.
So I think we have been having to learn as we go a lot, and that's been a challenge. But I think between the two of us, we have a shared energy and commitment to it, so that I think we can find our way. But we would really love to be able to eventually hire a team that includes an HR person, for example.
Yeah.
We need that.
in good time,
in
right?
Good time, yes.
So what does life look like outside of the practice? How do you get to enjoy your time that ends at 5? That I should say.
Yeah.
What we're talking about now, that starts at 5.
Yeah, I would say, well, I think I've been really enjoying seeing the world through my daughter's eyes. So, a lot of my own interests have been sort of maybe paused for a moment, because she's 3 years old. So she's full on toddler, lots of energy, so curious. She loves to just explore, and she's very much like her father, and likes to build things and understand how things work. And so a lot of our time is spent just
sounds like our mother too.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Puzzles.
Well, learning how things are built and assembled, that's pretty much your job.
Yeah, it's true. True.
Don't downplay it.
Yeah, that's very true. She grew up in and amongst a renovation, so I would say which is ongoing, my family home. But right now, my spare time is pretty much devoted to that, to encouraging her and enjoying life, and through her eyes. There's so much beauty in the world that I think as older people we take for granted, but the snow falling from the sky is an event, and the flowers blooming in the spring is this wonderful experience, and so that's actually been really rewarding for me. And then, my free time, as I kind of alluded to briefly there, my husband and I are building a home for our family. So that is, and is somewhat practical, but also personal. And we're, working through that. So weekends end up being that when she's sleeping. So
what Emery hasn't said yet that she told me over lunch was that the Reno has led the three of them to share a room.
Yes. Yes.
And so you have a 3-year-old roommate.
Yes, exactly. Who doesn't really like to sleep in that much. So
who can wake up in the 5s
yes.
that was previously the 4s.
Yes.
Just imagine that though for a sec, if you're listening, that you're trying to really work and grow your practice, and you have to be able, like all of us, because none of us know what the other one's encountering in their life. You've got to overcome the fatigue. You've got to overcome some of those trials and tribulations of knowing that you're not going to necessarily get that reprieve tonight, because you're going back to the same thing, and like that can take a toll on the wrong person. So for you to be able to come into this each day, and bring your energy, and I've been feeling it, so it's a hard thing to be able to do. So good on you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And I mean, I think they're all toward I'm not sure what this goal or trajectory is that I'm on, but I think that I could say that I enjoy life. I can say that I enjoy working in the practice. Like, for example, since we started the practice, I've never woken on a Monday morning and said, oh no, here we go again. I have to go to this job. So that has been transformative, to be able to have a business where I look forward to, even there are challenges, but that I can look forward to them and not sort of bemoan them, or, I can meet those challenges head on, and I can also celebrate the wins. And I think that has been really wonderful as a business owner. And that gives me energy. I think, it kind of motivates me instead of making me too tired, because there's always there's never a dull moment. So you can't almost be tired. There's no option.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I think, thankfully I'm at a stage where my kids are a little bit older, and it's like I don't have to quite deal with it the same way.
Yeah.
What I want to know, like, what are some of the things that you have done previously in your life for yourself that you're not getting to do right now, that you look forward to doing when that time does come again?
Yes. This is exciting. I think one thing that we started the conversation with was drawing and sketching, and I haven't had much time for that beyond, let's say, drawing with my daughter, which is a lot of fun actually, but having time for myself to go out and sketch or sit for a few hours and paint. I look forward to that. I look forward to reading a book for myself again. This is something that I'm really craving recently. Just to read a book that, again, isn't a kid's book, which I actually really like some of them, but to sit down and read a book. And I think once I have my own room, again, in our edition, we will get back to that. So it seems like that's on the horizon.
Yeah. But so by the time this airs,
we'll be reading.
You'll be reading books again.
I have this funny thing of ordering books that I'm looking forward to reading, and I have a stack of them now that have not been cracked. So I'm just waiting. They're waiting for me. But I'm looking forward to that. I really enjoy, we were talking about running, because I know you're also a runner, and I'm just looking forward to maybe running more consistently. But I think my daughter will have to be a little bit older before I can leave her on her own to, in the morning to do that. So, but we all run together as a family, which is nice. But, those sort of solitary runs, I think, are the best. And those I'll get back to someday.
They're so good.
Yeah, they are.
As we talk about running, I'm just gonna say to those that have participated in this, I'm just gonna name a few of you. Maybe one day we'll organize a run for some good cause or something. But I know Jordan Heckman that you run competitively, and Wenda Lau and Vanessa Fong. Who else did I speak to that was a runner? I think those are those that I remember. Yourself. I know that's a decent amount of people.
Yeah,
Five people,
yeah.
5 of us.
Yeah. That'd be a good running group.
Right?
Yeah.
One day. Anne-Marie, thank you. Thank you for taking time. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing the story. Thank you for the candor.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you participating in this.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. It's nice to always reflect upon what brought me here today to speak to you. So it's nice to have those moments. I appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'll tell you, if you're listening, that you can find the blue logo on Instagram for Behind the Build, and you'll be able to see visuals of some of the projects that Anne-Marie and Andrew want to share about the practice, and whether those are completed projects or projects in construction. You'll be able to find it there. And then the other thing I please ask you to do is to give the podcast 5 stars wherever you're listening. It just helps with exposure. So with all of that, thank you for listening, and Anne-Marie, thanks for joining.
Thank you.